Do you know what today is, besides being March 31st? Today is Transgender Day of Disability, also known as Trans Day of Disability, so a little bit shortened. And I appreciate you taking the moment to jump on this video and check out what I have to say about it. As a transgender person who normally does product reviews, today I just want to take a moment to be visible and to be able to say, here I am a trans person, and you know what? Today I'm going to extend out a hand and ask for your help on how to be an ally and share with you some quick tips and things that you should know when you want to be an ally to the trans community. And today's a great day to do it since, I want to be visible and I want to be able to assist you in being a great ally. So here's what I got to share with you. First thing that you can do is, just like you are here today, commemorate and share all the annual events that the trans community celebrates. So starting with today, we got March 31st is Trans Day of Visibility. You're here, you're present. Maybe take a moment and reach out to a trans person and tell them that, you're thankful for being in their life or having them share something with you. Maybe something that you can extend to them, maybe a way to be helpful. And you'll see other things as we go along. Another one is International Pronouns Day. This is always on the third Wednesday of October. That's another great day that, maybe you need to celebrate just to be able to be aware of different pronouns that are used. Not everybody uses, a he or a she pronoun. Some people use they, them. Some people use Z. Lots of other pronouns are going on, and it's a great way to be able to celebrate those that maybe don't use traditional pronouns like he or she. And if you know what those are, it's really great that you use them. Next one is Transgender Day of Remembrance. This one happens on November 20th, and this is where, unfortunately, we remember all of the people that have passed away in the previous year that are trans and are likely being murdered for just being who they are, for being trans. Generally, it comes from people that were being outed. And that's why there's some safety issues that I'll go over later on about how to be careful about being friends with a trans person and what you can and can't say that could potentially out them. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of protections right now in the United States that if you are outed as a trans person, the government doesn't legally protect, those individuals. And unfortunately, every year we have a slew of people that are murdered because of being who they are. So if the more that we can do to protect people who are trans so that this is not happening and have more allies, this is going to be something that's going to be critical to helping the community. So first one, just be here, celebrate events, make them visible, make it known that you're here with us. All right, another thing that is really, really important to know, very at the top of the list, is realizing that everybody transitions differently. There is no right way to transition. Everything that I talk about is generally what my personal transition has looked like, but it's not the same for everybody. So one of the things that a lot of people do is they start taking hormones. Maybe they're using hormone replacement therapy because they're going from female to male. They want to add testosterone to their body so that they can have a more masculine look. That's what helped me grow this amazing beard. But it's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to transition in a traditional way or in, a way that, many others do. Some people choose not to do any type of hormones. Same goes with any type of surgery. Clothing choices. Not everybody feels what we call dysphoria the same way, so maybe some people are transitioning from female to male, but maybe they don't identify as wearing masculine clothing. Maybe they still like wearing some feminine clothing, or they still like, very traditional pink things. It's completely fine. Everybody transitions differently, and it's going to be their process, what feels right to them. And the other thing that I will note is it's important that you be patient with people. Sometimes people are trying to figure it out as they go, and they might try something and it might not work for them, so they may change their mind later on what they're doing or how they're feeling. Maybe, somebody starts out transitioning and they decide they want to, present as a non-binary person, maybe not fully as one gender or the other. maybe they feel like they're both genders, and then maybe at one point they decide, you know what, I really do want to be more masculine, and identify as male in the future. It happens. Let people decide for themselves what path they want to take. Try not to be the person that's pushing them in one direction or another. Let them figure it out. It'll take some time, but they will figure it out. Along those same lines, I would say avoid what we call backhanded compliments or helpful tips. Some people do feel as though, they know better than others, especially within the community itself, unfortunately, and they tend to push people in one direction or another. Don't do things like that. And then what I say is don't avoid doing backhanded compliments. So something like, "I never knew you were trans," or "I never would have assumed, anything specific to being trans." Um, don't assume is like a really big self category, which I'll go into other things. The biggest is don't assume someone is trans by looking at them. Very similar to how, you don't want anybody to assume you're gay or to assume you're straight or like whatever your orientation is. Don't assume someone's orientation. Don't assume someone's gender. Don't assume a lot of things. Don't assume that because someone is trans that they have a different sexual orientation either. When people transition, it may affect their orientation or it may not. Depends on how they decide that they want to identify themselves. But orientation is very different than their gender identity, so make sure you keep those two separate. People have a right to define who they are. So this one's a little bit tougher. There is a lot that goes into defining who someone is. So we're going to start with terminology. So I call myself transgender or trans. There are other people that call themselves transsexual. It's not a word that I put on myself. It's not a word that I tend to put on the community, but I am not going to define somebody else. If somebody calls themselves a transsexual, that's on them. Like, that's their right to call themselves what they want. A lot of times it is an older population, so I would say someone maybe age like 40 and above that tends to use the word transsexual over transgender, and that's just because that was the word that they had to identify themselves when they were transitioning or maybe early in their transition, and it's the word that identifies with them. That's what they feel comfortable using. So it's not one that I use for myself, but I'm not going to police them on what they use for them. Other people within the trans community call themselves non-binary, gender queer, and sometimes, like I said, they just need time to figure out what they are, how they want to define themselves. When it comes to defining yourself, a lot of times people will use different pronouns, right? So I use he, him. Other people may use she, her, they, them, whatever the different varieties are that people have. When you're trying to know what pronouns to call someone, the best advice that I can give you is to listen. What are other people around this person calling them? Kind of listen and see what other people are saying before you assume. Another thing that you could do is share your own pronouns. So introduce yourself. So I might introduce myself and I'll say, I'm Mason Luke and I use he, him pronouns. And that's sort of like the opening bridge to be able to say, hey, I'm this person, here are my pronouns. And it might kind of set the standard for how the next person should introduce themselves to you, which is sort of that gateway to finding out their pronouns without asking. And then the next one is respectfully asking if needed. I'd like to know that could just be a simple approach like, I'd like to know what your pronouns are. What are your preferred pronouns? What pronouns can I use for you? Just try not to do it in a way that makes it sound as though it's very unclear what their pronouns are, or that you're, maybe reading them as maybe not presenting with their authentic self. Do it respectfully the best you can. If someone were to approach me and ask me what my pronouns were, might feel a little bit uncomfortable. It might be that you're trying to read into who I am and that I don't identify as male. So try to pick up on some social cues before you have to ask. What else can I tell you? People have a right to define themselves. Doesn't matter their assigned sex at birth. It doesn't matter what their physical appearance is, right? So even though I am presenting very masculine, I have a beard, I have a deeper voice, I have, a flatter chest, like I'm presenting relatively male when it comes to, definitions of what masculinity looks like in the community, right? But if I really wanted to and I didn't want to use he, him pronouns, I have a right to do that. Like, that's my choice, that's my decision. So it just needs to be respected no matter what someone looks like. All right. Next area that you can be helpful. Don't ask certain things about people, right? Like, I don't go up to a perfect stranger generally and ask them, uh, have you ever had surgery before? Have you, are you on this medication? Um, who do you sleep with? Things like this are of a relatively personal nature. It's not something that you're going to go up to someone you just met and ask about. So don't do it for trans people. Don't ask about surgeries. Don't ask about their hormones. Don't ask about their sexual orientation. Don't ask about their sex life. The big one is don't ask what their real name is. Whatever their name is that they're telling you is the one that you need to use for them and respect. So there's some very simple don't asks. All right, we talked a little bit about this one early on, and this is confidentiality. So if someone is telling you who they are, they're giving you information and an insight to their life, right? If they're saying, that they're a trans person, maybe they're telling you about their sexual orientation. Any of those things are what I consider of a confidential nature. It's not something you just always go around and tell people, right? Respect that. Don't go around and share it with other people. It really can put people at risk. I talked about earlier Trans Day of Remembrance. What happens is sometimes when the wrong person finds out that a person is transgender, it now puts a target on their back for hate crimes and different targeted attacks. So be careful with who you're telling things to, and even when you meet someone, using the right pronouns in conversation can be really helpful. If you're constantly misgendering a person in a conversation, especially in public, it kind of puts a target on them, like, what's going on here? It could also make you look really bad if you're just using the wrong pronouns all the time. Public people might think that there's something wrong with what you are doing, as opposed to the other. But if they could pick up on cues that maybe the other person might be trans, it could put a target on them. So be very careful with the words that you're using, how you're using them, and what you're sharing. What else can you do? You can learn more about trans people in general, the experiences of people who are trans. Seek out different media sources. So there's great things in film, there's great things in print, like books, there's great resources online, and meet people. If there are people that are trans in your community or friends of yours that are trans, ask them about their life, ask them for resources. What would be great to know? There's a great documentaries I know on things like Netflix. You can kind of just search in there for transgender and you'll find a whole slew of them that are mostly documentaries, but a great way to learn about maybe the history of the community, how we got to where we are today, and different, even just social things that are neat. All right, next we have come out as an ally. All right, next for this one, know your limits too. Make sure that you are doing as much as you can without being a burden to yourself. Like, because there are times where you're not going to know something. Recognize that. Recognize that you are not going to know all the resources, but know where you can forward someone if you need them. Right. Vocalize and show inclusion. So, like I said earlier, use your personal pronouns when you're talking to people. Maybe put them in your email signatures, maybe on a name tag, your bios, whatever it is, just to show that inclusivity. The next one is be mindful of colloquialisms or terms and phrases. So make sure that you're trying to when you talk to people in a group setting, right? Talk to them as a group of people. Don't use ladies and gentlemen. Or if you have to be specific about a person, say, the person in blue as opposed to the man in front. Things like that. The biggest thing about coming out, though, is it's nothing to really come out per se if you're not doing something about it. So how can you do something about it is sort of the next one. And that is help make trans voices be heard. So lift up those voices around you that are saying what they need and how you can be a better ally. Stand up against anti-trans legislation, whether this is state, local, or federal. Um, Anything that's going to create more gender diversity is going to create a safer place for trans people as well as everybody around them. Challenge anytime you hear inappropriate jokes in public. So if you see that trans people are at like the brunt of a joke, address it. Tell them it's inappropriate. Do what you can to stop those things because those things can be very hurtful. support all gender restrooms. So a lot of times when there's any type of options to be able to maybe make an inclusive space, support doing gender neutral restrooms, or all gender restrooms. So that way people don't have to pick and choose, especially non-binary folks who maybe don't feel comfortable picking one or the other. And there's also safety concerns. So these are some of my great tips on how to become an ally, and I hope that they are helpful to you. I would love to know which ones stuck out to you the most. If you want to comment below, I'd be glad to hear them. If you have questions, also feel free to comment or reach out to me directly at masonluke.com. And I'm glad that you guys took a moment out of your day to be able to learn how these great tips can help you and a trans person in your life. Thanks, everyone.